Trump has just announced a sweeping new tariff on cars.
This is very modest. And what we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff.
What if the quietest country in the world just flipped the global economy upside down without firing a single shot? While everyone was watching China, it was Canada that pulled the trigger. In less than 24 hours, the North American auto industry was thrown into chaos. Tesla's lifeline cut, Ford's factories slowed. The American dream of clean energy and economic revival hijacked by a country we thought we could trust. This isn't a headline, it's a blueprint for collapse. And it started with one signature in Ottawa. How did Tesla become the first casualty? Why is Japan building America's cars now? And what if this isn't just a trade war, but the final unraveling of U.S. industrial power? What's happening? Tesla was always a company balanced on the edge of brilliance and instability. Its success relied not just on innovation, but precision, parts arriving just in time, materials sourced from global partners, and logistics moving like clockwork. That clock just warned of delayed processing times and increased costs due to Canadian regulatory changes. It didn't matter whether the restrictions were temporary. Tesla's business model wasn't built for temporary. Suppliers raised their prices overnight. Internal sourcing teams scrambled to find alternate suppliers in Australia, South America. These facilities, built to produce batteries at massive scale, suddenly faced supply uncertainty. Nickel shipments from Canadian mines were halted for compliance verification. Lithium exports slowed under new inspection regimes. Aluminum smelting partners north of the border. Within 72 hours of Canada's mineral restrictions, the ripple effects hit Tesla's gigafactories in Nevada and Texas. South America. These facilities, even China, a country Tesla had spent the last 5 years trying to become less dependent on. But there's no magic wand for this kind of shift. Supply chains aren't plug and play. They are ecosystems, and Tesla's was withering. Investors felt it first. Stock analysts downgraded their outlooks. Financial media began speculating if this was the end of Tesla's dominance. Elon Musk, never one to hold back, lashed out on social media. But for once, his bravado didn't calm the market, because the problem wasn't perception, it was production. Delivery estimates began to slip. Battery output fell behind schedule. Assembly slowed. Tesla's once ironclad promise of innovation on demand was cracking under the weight of missing minerals. And yet, as dire as it was, the real damage was still hiding at the border. Border weaponized. While the headlines focused on tariffs and minerals, something more insidious was unfolding at the Canada-US border. Mark Carney had discovered the most effective form of modern economic warfare. It wasn't about tariffs or embargoes. It was bureaucracy. Canadian customs authorities didn't need to break international trade laws. They just needed to enforce existing ones aggressively. Shipments of auto parts, previously waved through in hours, were now selected for random inspection. Cross-border truckers found themselves parked for 12 to 24 hours awaiting clearance. Ports in Ontario and British Columbia quietly restructured their loading priorities. Trains were held without explanation. Paperwork was scrutinized with unprecedented rigor. To the outside world, it all looked like Canada was just doing its job. But inside the logistics offices of Tesla, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, the message was clear. The game had changed. Parts started arriving late. Assembly lines missed production windows. Service centers ran low on replacements. EVs that were supposed to roll off the line in April now had estimated delivery dates in July. Tesla's crisis became a signal to the world. Canada wasn't just retaliating. It was strategically dismantling one of the most advanced industrial systems on Earth, and doing it legally. China watched, so did Japan. Germany sent economic observers. This wasn't just a trade spat, this was a masterclass in soft retaliation. And the ripple hit every dealership in America. EV war begins. Then came the real hammer blow. Canada's New Democratic Party, emboldened by the chaos and backed by rising nationalist sentiment, pushed forward legislation that would rock the electric vehicle industry to its core. A 100% tariff on all Tesla imports into Canada, effective immediately. But that wasn't all. The bill also introduced a $10,000 subsidy for any EV built entirely within Canada. The two moves combined created a seismic shift. Tesla wasn't just blocked, it was replaced. Ford, already building EVs in Ontario, saw demand spike. General Motors, with battery operations north of the border, was now the darling of Canadian regulators. Even Volkswagen announced it would accelerate its Ontario battery facility timeline. Tesla, it became a pariah, priced out of the Canadian market, denied access to key subsidies, and locked out of the minerals it once relied on. This wasn't just a policy, it was war, not conventional war, not tariff war. This was green nationalism, a radical new strategy where climate language becomes the weapon and industrial dominance the prize, where carbon neutrality isn't a moral goal but a nationalist one, and where Tesla, the poster child of the green revolution, was now the outsider. Canada had flipped the rules. Electric vehicles were no longer about saving the planet. They were about saving local economies, building domestic power, and punishing those who tried to lead without partnership. And Carney wasn't done fighting. If you've made it this far, you care about the future of riding, and so do we. Hit subscribe to stay ahead of every shift, every shakeup, and every story that matters to real riders like you. While Tesla scrambled and the US panicked, Carney began reshaping the hemisphere itself, one deal at a time. Carney's coup. Mark Carney didn't rise to global prominence by accident. Before becoming Prime Minister of Canada, he led not one, but two of the world's most powerful central banks, the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. He's not a politician in the traditional sense. He's a tactician. And in the chaos of America's trade war, Carney isn't reacting. He's leading. While Donald Trump lashes out with bold declarations and blunt instruments, Carney works quietly, strategically, and surgically. At a World Trade Forum in Seoul, he doesn't need to shout. Instead, he presents Canada as a stabilizing force. He doesn't blame. He doesn't escalate. He reframes. Canada, he says, believes in fair trade, in climate commitments, and in rules-based order, and the world listens. Asia responds first. Japanese and South Korean auto manufacturers, frustrated by American tariffs, begin exploring Canadian partnerships. In Europe, Carney's calm contrast to Trump's chaos makes headlines. French and German finance ministers meet with him, not to debate, but to align. In Latin America, Brazil and Chile begin formal talks to enhance trade with Canada on rare minerals and green technologies. Canada isn't acting like a middle power anymore. It's behaving like a global hub. The media begins calling it the Carney Doctrine, a mix of environmental values, trade fairness, and economic leverage. And while Trump tweets, Carney builds coalitions. The impact is subtle, but devastating. America isn't just being outmaneuvered, it's being redefined. Canada is no longer the junior partner, it's the rule setter. And he wasn't working alone. North America, without America. The most dangerous moves are the quiet ones. While Washington is distracted by its internal fractures and external feuds, a new economic map is being drawn, and the United States isn't on it. Behind closed doors, Canadian and Mexican officials are rewriting trade infrastructure. Not theoretically, not symbolically, but physically. Battery plants are being planned along the Ontario-Quebec corridor. New EV component hubs are rising across Nuevo León and Jalisco. Japanese and Korean companies aren't waiting on Washington. They're investing directly into this new corridor, routing billions of dollars into a trade pipeline that connects Canada to Mexico without passing through the U.S. at all. Shipping lanes realign. Customs policies streamline. A cross-border tax credit system is even proposed that rewards parts sourced from within this new bloc. Ford's Canadian operations expand. Hyundai's Mexican logistics double in capacity. But in Ohio and Michigan, warehouses sit idle. What's happening isn't a punishment, it's a replacement. U.S. automakers, previously the gravitational center of North American auto production, are now drifting in isolation. They're not left out by accident, they're being written out by design. And then Europe picked a side. Europe walks away from American cars. There was a time Europe looked westward for direction. Made in America wasn't just a label, it was a promise of power, of progress, of partnership. But somewhere between the tariffs, the walkouts, and the whiplash politics, that promise turned into a warning. Now Europe isn't retaliating, it's evolving. While Washington plays economic roulette, Brussels is playing the long game. Germany pulls the plug on a planned Volkswagen factory in Georgia and repositions it in the Netherlands, closer to home, closer to stability. Renault turns away from U.S. suppliers and signs contracts in South Korea. The United Kingdom quietly considers excluding U.S.-made EVs from its climate subsidy program, not out of spite, but out of prudence. America hasn't just become unreliable, it's become become irrelevant in key boardrooms. A European trade official put it bluntly, "We've outgrown dependency on countries that can't outgrow their own politics." The market reflects that shift. Ford's momentum fades. GM's comeback in Europe flatlines. Tesla, once a darling, watches ad budgets dry up in Germany and France. It's not a backlash, it's boredom. Hyundai, Toyota, and even Chinese automakers are filling the vacuum with precision and poise. What we're witnessing isn't a rupture, it's a rite of passage. Europe isn't burning bridges, it's building new ones, away from a former mentor turned loose cannon. And in the space America used to dominate, a different kind of order is taking root quietly, permanently. China moves in. While America fights its allies and isolates its industries, China sees an opening, and it doesn't walk through it, it storms in. The first strike is inked quietly, an agreement between Chinese battery manufacturer CATL and a Quebec-based mining company for long-term access to lithium and cobalt. Then comes the infrastructure play. BYD, China's fastest-growing EV brand, announces a multi-billion-dollar plant to be built in Monterrey, Mexico. Within weeks, NIO follows, securing a joint venture with Canadian suppliers to produce aluminum casings and battery modules. These are not small moves. These are global chess pieces being repositioned. What makes it more alarming is that these Chinese companies are building their supply chains inside North America, specifically to exploit the US-Mexico-Canada trade framework. If built in Mexico or Canada, their EVs qualify for reduced tariffs when sold in the US, even if the parts are Chinese. China didn't confront American manufacturing, it replaced it. Ford and GM can't match China's vertical integration. Tesla now faces home turf competition, but without the subsidies and with a broken supply chain. BYD launches a $28,000 EV in Mexico City and whispers about U.S. expansion. NIO begins recruiting engineers in Toronto with promises of global reach. Meanwhile, American companies are laying off staff, delaying models, and pleading for policy relief. And in Washington, Trump pulled the trigger. Made in America, made to fail. It began with a podium, an anthem, and a declaration that echoed through every industrial town in America. President Donald Trump announced that American cars would once again be made with American steel, assembled by American hands, and powered by American resources. It was a promise that appealed to nostalgia, pride, and economic desperation. The executive order was signed. The message was clear: no more foreign reliance. But behind the patriotic optics was a grim economic reality. The United States no longer had the infrastructure to support this kind of ambition. Key minerals like lithium, nickel, and cobalt, essential for electric vehicle batteries, were not mined at scale within American borders. Decades of offshoring and environmental resistance had gutted domestic mining efforts. What remained was expensive, fragmented, and decades behind global competitors. Factories faced another brutal truth. The skilled labor force that once powered the Midwest was gone. Welders had retired. Machinists had moved on. Line operators now worked in service jobs or left towns entirely. And with immigration crackdowns tightening the labor pool even further, companies couldn't even hire enough workers to reopen shuttered plants. Within weeks, the consequences became visible. Factory floors meant to roar back to life remained silent. Equipment lay idle. Plans to rebuild domestic supply chains were delayed indefinitely. What was framed as an industrial comeback was, in reality, a logistical nightmare. Patriotism doesn't weld steel. It doesn't refine nickel. It doesn't train electricians. Auto manufacturers issued cautious press releases. Industry insiders rang the alarm. But the administration stayed the course, pushing harder, louder, as if volume could overcome vacancy. The result? A nation primed for revival suddenly found itself choking on its own ambition. And then the machines stopped, the factory shutdown spiral. What began with whispers of delay turned into a full-blown shutdown spiral. Ford paused operations at 3 plants, citing material shortages and compliance disruptions. General Motors slashed output at its Ohio and Michigan facilities. Stellantis announced sweeping layoffs, beginning with contract workers and expanding to entire departments. Suppliers, who had already been on razor-thin margins, began to collapse. Seat manufacturers in Indiana, dashboard assemblers in Kentucky, wiring harness fabricators in Wisconsin. Each relied on volume orders from major automakers, and with those orders frozen, they had no buffer. One by one, the lights went out. The effects cascaded through the ecosystem. Local diners that fed plant workers closed their doors. Tool and die shops, generational businesses, laid off their last apprentices. Towns like Flint, Toledo, and Dayton, once promised rebirth through tariffs, found themselves spiraling back into economic despair. The collapse wasn't just economic, it was psychological. For many communities, these plants were more than workplaces. They were identity, history, hope. And now they were ghost towns. The auto industry didn't collapse because of foreign competition. It collapsed under the weight of a promise that couldn't be fulfilled, a mandate that had no foundation, a patriotic illusion that dissolved under scrutiny. And that's when Trump's base turned on him. The MAGA backlash. It started with a single viral video, a laid-off welder from Michigan standing in front of his locked plant, MAGA hat in hand, asking, "Where's my job now, Mr. President?" The video sparked a wave of confessions, anger, and grief from across the Rust Belt. Facebook groups once dedicated to Trump 2024 turned into forums for economic pain. Reddit threads filled with photos of foreclosure notices, repossessed trucks, and letters of termination. These weren't political operatives. They were factory workers, truck drivers, assembly line veterans, and they were furious. For years, they had defended tariffs. They believed in America first. They voted against their own economic interests, trusting the promise that their loyalty would be rewarded with jobs, wages, and dignity. Now they felt betrayed, not by globalization, not by Mexico, not by China, but by the very politician who promised them salvation. Rallies became protests. Chants turned into accusations. Former Trump supporters began showing up at town halls demanding answers, accountability, and a reversal of policies they once cheered. Conservative talk radio cracked. Right-wing columnists began voicing doubt. Republican lawmakers in swing states distanced themselves, worried about re-election. The Republican base didn't just fracture, it erupted. Trump had ignited a fire in working-class America. Now it was consuming his own support. And while the base broke, the real threat came from the north, the energy time bomb. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't issue a threat. He didn't need to. All it took was a carefully worded statement about reviewing energy export frameworks, and the markets lost their minds. Canada is the largest foreign supplier of oil to the United States. It also provides substantial hydroelectric power to northeastern states like New York, Vermont, and Maine. And suddenly, everyone realized just how fragile American energy independence really was. Gasoline prices jumped by 70 cents per gallon in less than 2 weeks. The Midwest saw rolling blackouts due to grid instability. Governors scrambled to reassure citizens while quietly begging Ottawa for reassurances. Carney, ever the diplomat, remained silent, but the message was received. Canada didn't need to weaponize energy. The threat alone was enough. Wall Street analysts began adjusting forecasts. Energy companies paused expansion plans. Investors braced for the worst. Washington, it had no plan. America's industrial engine didn't just lose its fuel, it lost its confidence. And now the real victims stepped into the spotlight. Consumers get crushed. Across the United States, car dealerships are no longer places of excitement and choice. They are silent, half-lit showrooms filled with unsold vehicles and dwindling foot traffic. What was once considered a rite of passage, buying a new car, has now become a financial impossibility for millions. The cost of ownership has skyrocketed. Used cars, which once served as a refuge for budget-conscious buyers, are now selling for record-breaking amounts. A 5-year-old sedan that once went for $15,000 now commands over $25,000. Even aging trucks with rust on their tailgates are suddenly valuable, simply because they exist. But it doesn't stop there. Maintenance and repairs, once manageable, are now unaffordable for the average household. A routine alternator replacement that used to cost $300 now costs nearly $900 due to parts shortages and labor scarcity. Even oil changes have doubled in price. Meanwhile, insurance premiums are climbing alongside inflated car values, turning every minor incident into a major financial burden. Americans are squeezed from all sides, unable to buy, unable to maintain, unable to replace. And while electric vehicle options grow, they are priced beyond reach for the middle class. Tesla's cheapest models now exceed $40,000. Charging infrastructure remains inconsistent outside of cities. For rural America, the promise of the electric future is just another headline, not a reality. This isn't just economic pain, it's cultural disintegration. Car ownership has long symbolized American independence. Now, the dream of the open road is slipping away. Families are downsizing, delaying purchases, or walking away from car ownership entirely. Rideshare signups are rising. Used bike sales are up. For many, it's not just about getting from place to place. It's about losing a piece of their identity. But the people who built those wheels, they're gone too. The skilled labor shortage. The engines have stopped, not because of lack of demand, but because no one is left to build them. For decades, America devalued vocational trades in favor of 4-year degrees: welding, machining, auto diagnostics. These were labeled as fallback careers, not aspirational ones. But now the cost of that cultural neglect is coming due, and the timing could not be worse. The average age of American skilled workers is over 50. Retirement is emptying out the trades faster than they can be replaced. Meanwhile, harsh immigration policies have shrunk the pool of foreign-born labor that once filled the gaps. Apprenticeship programs are underfunded, under-enrolled, and under-promoted. High schools have gutted shop classes. Trade schools are often priced like colleges, but without the marketing glamour or social status. What's left is a country that cannot service its own supply chains. Broken EVs sit in lots with no one to fix them. Assembly lines pause for lack of technicians. Construction crews delay projects for weeks, waiting for electricians and pipe fitters. The shortage goes beyond cars. It's hitting infrastructure, energy, agriculture, everything. This labor crisis isn't loud. It's not sudden, it's quiet and crushing. It builds slowly, day by day, job by job, until entire industries grind to a halt. America has talent, but it let it expire, retire, and relocate. And now, when the country needs it most, it's gone. So the East stepped in. Japan and South Korea take over the U.S. market. While Washington is stuck in policy gridlock and America's industrial base struggles to function, two nations are stepping into the void. Not with noise, but with competence. Japan and South Korea are not just producing cars. They're building trust. Toyota has expanded its footprint in Kentucky and Texas. Hyundai and Kia are opening new plants in Georgia and Alabama. They hire local. They build on time. They deliver without the drama. And American consumers are noticing. When faced with long waits and high prices from legacy U.S. brands, buyers are turning to the brands that show up. For the first time in history, many of these foreign automakers are being seen as more American than the actual American companies. They provide jobs, they build reliable cars, and they don't get caught in the political chaos that derails Detroit. It's not a hostile takeover, it's a quiet conquest. American companies, hollowed out by years of mismanagement and political interference, are losing ground. Ford, GM, and Stellantis are facing shrinking market share. Dealerships are transitioning their inventory strategies, favoring Asian-made cars over traditional domestic ones. It's a shift not just in supply, but in allegiance. And the final question isn't how, it's how long. End of the empire. Is U.S. auto power gone forever? There was a time when American roads were paved with pride, when every rumbling engine echoed with the legacy of Detroit, when the phrase "Made in America" meant something. That time is slipping into memory. Today, the global auto industry is realigning, and the United States is no longer at its center. Europe has turned inward, prioritizing its own domestic industries and regional supply chains. Asia is soaring. China has leapfrogged in electric vehicle production. Japan and South Korea now dominate the mid-tier and premium markets. Even India is catching up, rapidly developing its EV and compact car segments. And then there's Canada, once the quiet neighbor, now the chess master of North American trade. Under Mark Carney's leadership, Canada has executed a blueprint that not only protected its economy, but exposed America's. What began as a targeted tariff has evolved into a full-scale redrawing of global trade lines. One thing is clear, the rest of the world is not waiting. If America continues down this path, the question will not be whether U.S. auto dominance is over. It will be how long before the world forgets it ever existed. The world isn't waiting for America to catch up, it's moving on. If this collapse caught you off guard, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next shock, and let us know in the comments. Can U.S. auto power be saved, or is it already too late?